Joining us now on the phone is CBS News producer Portia Siegelbaum, who is in Havana. And Portia, it's good to talk to you on this historic day. Give us a sense of what reaction is on the ground there now that people are waking up to the news of Fidel Castro's death.
I think the news started spreading last night pretty quickly. The people who watched the newscast and heard the announcement called other people. What's interesting is the city is extremely quiet. Last night there was a little bit more movement as clubs, nightclubs, and hotels where there were shows going on learned about Fidel Castro's death when the activities were cut off and they were told that mourning was being established. So there was people, tourists and others coming out in the streets saying, is it true? What happened? But during the night, and I was out driving around the city, and right now, the streets are very, very quiet. Very little traffic. I think people are in their homes absorbing the news and watching their TVs. There's special programming on, special coverage, with people coming on who knew Fidel, videos, etc. And so there's shock here. I think people didn't expect this to happen now and so suddenly.
We're watching reaction here in South Florida, Portia, as you know. Talk to us, because obviously there has been an influx of people who, over the last couple of years since the beginning of the normalization process that was begun in late 2014, there has really been an upsurge in people trying to flee Havana and come to the United States because of concerns that perhaps the wet foot, dry foot policy that has allowed Cubans who get here to dry land to stay here. But explain to us about the affection that people on the ground there in Havana still have, some of them anyway, for this man, Fidel Castro.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a huge difference between the way he's perceived in Miami and here in Cuba, and also around the world. One of the first reactions that came out of Africa was the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Fidel Castro is venerated in Africa for being a supporter and very instrumental in helping to end apartheid there. But on the island, for people, you have to understand the language that's used in Miami doesn't even exist here. Maybe in small pockets of dissident groups, but they were the minority. For most people, Fidel Castro is the person that put this island on the map and gave it an importance way beyond the size of the island itself and its population. They gave them, they turned it around from being a place of prostitution and gambling and made it to a place that was known for its athletes, its artists, its healthcare system, the vaccines that they're now testing in the United States for cancer treatment that came out of the Cuban laboratories. So there's a whole different way of looking at it, and there's a lot of respect for him, especially in the older generation. Younger people who just grew up since 2006 when he basically semi-retired and then fully retired from public life because of a gastrointestinal illness. Those younger people don't really know him. They're not used to having him around all the time. But people over 40 are used to seeing Fidel on TV frequently. They're used to seeing him in public activities. He was always popping up in different places. And for them, it's, like cutting out something that's a part of their life for 50 years or so, and suddenly it disappears. So it leaves you kind of rootless. It's the only word I can think of. He was a figure that provided security for people here. So I think it's very hard for many people to accept that he's gone.
That is an interesting point, the perception there on the island versus the perception here in Miami, where people are out in the streets dancing and celebrating. But he was 90 years old, so people on the island had to have been preparing for this, had to have seen this coming. He, of course, ceded the power to his brother, Raul. Is there a sense of shock there on the island, or is it just a sense of quiet and, in some cases, mourning?
No, I think there's a sense of shock because he was 90. Everyone knows he was sick. He retired from public life, but he was still there. He wrote occasionally. He met with foreign visitors. He just met in the middle of November, in the middle of the month, I think the 16th, with the president of Vietnam, who was here. And all these pictures were posted on the Cuban media and website, and he looked fine. I mean, he was old, and he'd been getting frail, and he was stooped over, but he looked okay. His color was good. He was alert. He didn't look any sicker than he had 3 years ago or 4 years ago. So nobody expected that he would suddenly die like this. And I'll tell you, last April, he made one of his rare public appearances, and it was a rather long one, at the Communist Party Congress. And at that point he said, I'm getting old. I'm paraphrasing, and it's coming to my time like it is for everybody else. At some point, I'm going to be gone. And people almost didn't accept it that way. It was like his being at the Congress and talking was proof that he was going to be around for longer. Although at that moment you saw people in the audience crying as he spoke. We had no indication he's been iller, that he was suffering more. As I say, we saw the photos of him with the Vietnamese president. There was no indication that something had happened. People that worked with him that he was very interested in agriculture, and he had dedicated himself in these last period of time to animal husbandry, and he was experimenting with all kinds of special feed for the animals and plants for food, and they, been dealing with him, and nobody had an idea. He seemed to be fine. So I think it was unexpected. It's a shock, and you never really prepare for the death of someone like that, someone who seems bigger than life.
If you're just waking up to the news of Fidel Castro's death, this is live CBS 4 coverage. We're on the phone with Portia Siegelbaum, who has been a presence in Havana, in Cuba, for a number of years as a producer for CBS News. And Portia, I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of context here. You talked about how Fidel Castro was able to bring to an island of 11 million people an outsized influence, an outsized place on the world stage. How did he do it? How did he achieve that?
He did it in a couple of different ways. One, he created the policy of solidarity with liberation movements around the world. So think of the African continent. He sent Cuban troops at the request of the Angolan government to confront South African troops. And basically, it was Cuban troops that defeated the South African troops at a battle in a place called Cuito-Cuanavale that forced South Africa to the negotiating table at the United Nations and brought an end to apartheid. So it was, who would have thought that Cuba, this little island, would send thousands of troops to an African nation so far away and bring South Africa to its knees? That was an amazing feat. And so that put Cuba on the map for the African continent and for Latin America also. And Europe was very conscious of it. Our perceptions in the United States are very different from the rest of the world when we talk about this island. He also did it by creating an amazing healthcare system and an amazing biotech industry. So we're testing in the United States. There's a company in upstate New York that's testing a Cuban vaccine against cancer. But there are so many countries in the world that are using Cuban vaccines against a number of diseases. So it built up a public health system and a scientific system that the rest of the world has come here to get. Those are some of the ways he's done it. The list is really very, very long. And also just sports. Think of the athletes, the Juan Torrenas and the Stevensons who won the Olympic medals. And Cuba's an island. It's a Caribbean island. It's a small little place. It's 35 minutes from Miami by air. And I just wanted to comment on something you said before.
Yeah.
It's not just the Cubans that are leaving the island. there's like 13,000 Cuban Americans who have applied to repatriate to Cuba that are coming back here for different reasons, moving back to the island at least part of the time and establishing residency here. So even the Cuban Americans in the U.S. don't look at the island and Fidel Castro in such a black and white form.
And Portia, I'm wondering if you can just talk to us about being there. You're based there, you live there. What has been your experience just hearing people talk about how Cuba is going to move forward now that the start of normalized relations have begun? And now, of course, we have a new president-elect who's looking at the whole relationship between the U.S. and Cuba in a completely different light. Tell us kind of what the mood is that you've been getting there in the terms of the future of the relationship between the two countries.
Well, it's hard to know what the future is going to be. The Cubans are playing it very cautiously, the government, and they're taking a wait-and-see attitude. Raul Castro sent congratulations to Donald Trump when the election results came in. People were very happy about the policy that Obama took. I mean, people believe that the improved relationship with the United States was going to mean an improved standard of living for them, that the whole quality of life would go up because they would have more access to U.S. goods, there'd be U.S. trade, there'd be more travel. And that's true. I mean, just this coming Monday, the first commercial flight from Miami is landing here at 8:30 in the morning, American Airlines. And in the afternoon, there's going to be one of JetBlue from New York to Havana. Tuesday, United Airlines and Delta from Atlanta. So that has an impact because, one, it's bringing more Americans here who are spending money, and a lot of that money is going into the private sector. And it filters down, you know, it really does filter down to the whole population. So people look very positively. All the hundreds of thousands of Cuban Americans and Americans who become coming here under President Obama's policy of opening at least limited travel and a lot of cultural exchange. We just had Misty Copeland was here from the American Ballet Theater. We have Placido Domingo, the director of the LA Ballet Opera. The LA Opera is here right now. In fact, he was supposed to give a concert tonight, which I assume is being canceled because official mourning starts today. So people here had great high hopes for improved relations with the United States, and they're a little concerned about exactly what President-elect Trump will do, and kind of hoping that he will roll back on his statements on Cuba the way he's rolled back on other promises made during the campaign.
On the left-hand side of the screen are some live pictures from Havana. On the right-hand side of the screen, you probably can read out the sign Versailles, of course, a site where people have been celebrating in Little Havana here in South Florida since the news broke just after midnight or so of Fidel Castro's death. And Portia, I remember sitting in your office in Havana. I had come to the country to cover the reopening of the U.S. Embassy there when John Kerry, the Secretary of State, was in town to make an official visit and to sort of officiate over the reopening of that embassy there after decades and decades of estrangement between the two countries. And I asked you a moment ago about how it has been that Fidel Castro was able to bring about prominence to this little tiny Caribbean nation of a relatively small number of people, and you went through a list of his accomplishments, but I would love for you to speak a little bit about how he has ruled for so long with an iron fist, and the role that his dictatorship and the way that it's continued under his brother has played in sort of keeping law and order on the streets of Havana and all over that island, in terms of sort of creating the mythos, this sort of way that he has been revered, in spite of the fact that the people of Havana are oppressed, that their rights are infringed upon on a daily basis. In spite of all of that, they have been able to maintain their popularity and their power for so many decades.
Because the people that, and they do have a lot to do on civil rights and opening up freedom of expression, but the people that are falling into the path of the state security and the police are a minority in the country. So it's not all the people of Havana who are oppressed. If you ask the average resident here in Havana, if they feel oppressed and they're afraid of the police and state security, they're going to look at you cross-eyed. They don't feel that way. They don't walk around thinking my human rights are being repressed by the government. I can't do this, I can't do that. Everybody wants more. Everybody wants more access to the internet. Everybody wants more goods. People, that's logical. But it's really a minority group of the dissidents who are a minority in the country who have gotten beaten up, who've gotten sent to prison, etc. And most of the country population doesn't know about them or really care. They're not concerned. Most of the Cubans I talk to are looking of a way to get ahead economically. They're trying to do better for their family, to raise their standard of living. Internet, yes, everybody wants internet, and internet is very helpful for their jobs, but they don't walk around talking about political parties and the need for more freedom of speech. They want more loosening of the economy. That's what they're looking for. So I don't think there's that sense of an iron fist hanging over you in terms of the population in general. It's really a small portion of the population that looks at the government that way. What the average Cuban probably thinks is it's time for younger people, it's time for new ideas, it's time for us to move ahead. Great that we have relations with the United States. Let's see where else we can open up, what else we can do. But it's all in terms of improving their standard of living. They're really very much like Americans in that way. Because what do people want? They want a job that pays a living wage, and that's what the Cubans want. They want, improved transportation, affordable transportation. They want their kids to go to good schools and to have a good job in the future. That's exactly the kind of thing that both Americans and Cubans share in common. They're very similar to us. But they're not running around, exactly like the American people are not running around saying, I need, more liberty and more freedom. Americans are saying other things right now, but that's how I see it here.
And Portia, you've been so generous with your time. I just have one more question for you before we let you go. Since you are based there on the ground, it's very interesting to hear your perspective. And I'm just curious what you think is going to happen between the United States and Cuba in terms of the difference in Fidel and Raul Castro. Raul has obviously been a little bit more open. Fidel Castro even had harsh words after the normalization process began, saying we don't ever really need the United States and we're fine without them. Do you think that Raul Castro is going to be even more receptive to the United States overtures if they continue in that direction?
I think that I'm not sure how much control Fidel actually had over the making of that policy. I think he just said, yes, go ahead and do it, without maybe being particularly happy about it. I think there's probably still divisions in the government. There's still hardliners who probably are not happy about the progress made. But overall, I think Raul Castro, this is his policy, just as the economic reforms are his policy. But I think he's cautious and he moves slowly. And I don't think the absence of Fidel is going to make him suddenly plunge in, more quickly. I think he's going to continue at the rate he's going. There are people who think he should move faster, but I think he's, decided on his own pace, and with or without his older brother, I don't really think that can change. I could be wrong, but I don't see any radical change. I don't see Fidel's absence impacting on U.S.-Cuba relations in any notable way.
All right, CBS producer Portia Siegelbaum in Havana for us. Thank you so much for your time this morning.